Hello! So today we are going to do another Q&A. Shannon has written in with a great question. She says, I've just started True Freedom. I've done the first milestones, but I can't stop wondering if the trick feels so good, maybe I'd prefer to stay tricked, ? Okay, I'm glad that Shannon has put this forward. It's a brilliant point, and I remember thinking the same thing as I was learning the truth. I remember thinking, if the trick feels good, why not just stay tricked? The desire to stay tricked because the trick feels good is only a desire for someone who is still tricked. Once you see clearly and the lie is broken, you're then free to experience true pleasure, and then you realise that that wasn't pleasure at all. It was a trick. So it only feels like a pleasure that we want to stay in when we're tricked. Addiction, it's like some kind of spell or brainwashing. I mean, technically, yeah, it's a brain malfunction, like a brain injury sort of thing, but it plays out like a kind of spell or trance or like being brainwashed or something, like in that sort of state. A state that puts a limit on pleasure and an even lower limit on any pleasure besides the illusion of pleasure that that substance or activity provides. So imagine you're living on a scale of pleasure with causes of pleasure along the bottom, different things that give pleasure in life along the bottom, and the amount of pleasure up the side. And as you move along these different sources of pleasure along the bottom, you get different amounts of pleasure in those different areas. Then imagine you get a spike of pleasure when you use an addictive substance. I mean, sometimes you don't even notice, it depends on but the brain notices. So for the sake of simplicity, let's say it's cocaine. Although this applies to absolutely anything from gambling to crack, from opioid to nicotine. It's more or less perceptive to our conscious mind, but it works the same in the unconscious. So let's say you move along to cocaine on the scale and the amount spikes. Then the cap on pleasure in all the other things goes down. And then you go back to the crack bit, to the coke bit, and now that's gone down too. And then while all the other caps on all the other pleasures, all the other things, in the end they become so low it's miserable, so you stay with the coke. But because that has the highest pleasure cap out of anything else in your life, except now even that one is so slow that that's miserable too. And it still feels like it's the only pleasure you've got, and technically it is the most pleasurable thing that you've got now because it has destroyed the pleasure of everything else. You want to stay there? You want to stay low just because it's less low than everything else, even though everything else is only that low because of it. Maybe it'll help to know how those caps get lower and lower, like how it works scientifically. It's obviously really complex. In fact, like so much of the brain is still being discovered, and there's so much that even the True Freedom books have to like really boil it down a lot. And that's why as well I like to make these videos kind of add to the books. I don't want to just repeat myself. So yeah, I'll explain in a way that isn't quite explained in the True Freedom books, in a way that like adds to what's already in there, but it's still another simplification. It's an overview, and it does help if you've already read the first 3 milestones in particular. But we're going to try and get into it because I think it really helps. It helped me, it's helped loads of other people. So why does an addictive substance or activity lower the cap on all pleasure? Okay, so it's because dopamine, the neurotransmitter or brain chemical, is designed to create motivating pleasure, to put in the effort required for the pleasurable result. So for example, eating food is a pleasurable result, not just for the taste, but if you're hungry, it's literally satiating a need, and that's pleasurable. And there was a time when a lot of effort was required for food. So, you know, you had to hunt, you had to gather, you had to harvest, you had to sow, all of that. Now we don't need that as much now, but you still hopefully, you know, ideally need to cook. And sex is another example. Like, you know, that's a pleasurable thing that you have to work for, or should have to work for, with compromise and relationship. And connection with God is another one. Like, we get such a dopamine reward from connection with God, but that's another relationship. Relationships require effort. So then we get dopamine for the effort to get that. Like, that's the same with friendships. You know, if you want a real legitimate friendship, then like dopamine is a rewarding feeling. It's released for the reward, but it's also released then to motivate us for the effort of those relationships, of that food, of that water, of that sex. Exercise is a great example. Like, we get a dopamine release from exercise, but oh my gosh, like, it's effort, right? But dopamine is the motivating happy chemical to motivate us on the effort. Now, some forms of these things have become addictive to us these days because modern invention and lifestyle has removed a lot of the effort required for the reward. So, okay, there are lots of complexities to addiction around things like food and sex, etc. For example, well, no one's actually addicted to food or sex. Like, no one's addicted to chicken, and that's food. And no one's addicted to marital lovemaking, and that's sex. But no, we get it. It's that we get addicted to forms of those things that do what all addictive substances and activities do. So it's not the thing, it's the form of the thing. So yes, like, most of us no longer need to like hunt or harvest for food, and sex is increasingly available with decreasing relational effort, hence the increase of these issues. But even so, it's the forms of those things that create the most sense of reward, the most release of reward with the least effort. That's what becomes addictive. And it's more complicated than that. And of course, you know, food and sex, it connects with how we see ourselves, it connects with traumas, memory, like how we were raised around those things. But anyway, this is a bit of a digression, but like, bear with me and it will make sense. But so the brain releases some dopamine upon the result, the good thing, the food, the euphoric time of sung praise and prayer with God, as well as like other neurotransmitters that make you feel good get released at those times too. So like serotonin and endorphins and others. But the brain then catalogues that result and then releases more dopamine later in anticipation of the result. So it's like an algorithm. And it releases that to motivate us to put the effort in to get the result again. There are other happy brain chemicals, but dopamine is designed to motivate us. So serotonin, for example, is a relaxing, happy neurotransmitter, brain chemical. It's required for peace and rest and sleep, like it converts into melatonin so we sleep. Whereas dopamine is a motivating, happy neurotransmitter or brain chemical. It's required for getting up and being productive and having fun. The brain catalogues what feels good, that's good for us, ready to release dopamine to motivate us to make the effort required to get that feel-good result again. So that's how dopamine works. So the more we do these things, the good, pleasurable things, the more pleasurable our life is. The more our reward centre releases dopamine for motivation, the more motivated we become in general, and the more dopamine we release for motivation. Happy days. But the more we cut out the effort part of the reward, the more malfunctioned the whole process becomes, and the more short-circuited the brain becomes, the less dopamine the brain releases. Increasingly, the brain craves more of that quick dopamine release without the effort. I mean, the subconscious brain is lazy. It is. It's like, but it craves more of that but then the dopamine motivates, and that's just what it does. So now it's got nothing to motivate for. So then it just motivates for getting more dopamine. Instead of motivating us to make the effort it was designed to motivate us for. But then gradually it starts to cost us after the result instead of before it. So then the reward center gets stuck and uses its dopamine to motivate us only to get more of whatever started the whole process in the first place, and nothing else. It stops motivating us for any good effort in life and only for more of that substance or activity. And if that substance or activity becomes inaccessible, it will use a different one. That's why people talk about switching addictions. It's not a switch of addiction, it's just a switch of the source of the addiction. So increasingly, in the short-circuited malfunction, the brain only releases dopamine for the substance or activity of the addiction. And then the really cool part, because the dopamine isn't going to the effort it's designed for, the amount of it being released reduces because it's not being used what it's designed for, so less of it comes. So when the reward center is working well and healthily, it releases more dopamine for what it's designed for effort. And we have more motivated, enjoyable, happy lives. But when it's released against what it's designed for, less and less of it gets released. And all along, the rest of the brain is complying, like slowly altering itself, changing what your actions are telling it you want, more of the addictive substance or activity. Now that's really complex. We could do another video on that. It's too much to go into here. This is all a simplification, but basically gradually, not only is your reward center against you, but say for example, your amygdala is learning that the absence of that substance or activity is your greatest threat. So that's kicking your autonomic nervous system into fight or flight. So you're riddled with anxiety and restlessness and really deep angst, discomfort at the very thought of going without. Essentially, your amygdala is telling your body to prepare to fight or flee from a hungry lion. That discomfort, that angst, those shakes, those sweats, that's what that is. Meanwhile, that's largely what that is. It is more complicated. Meanwhile, like your RAS and your hippocampus are working together to notice and remember whatever will drive you to use and keep using. It will literally alter memories to allow you to keep using. Like many other parts of the brain adapt to keep you addicted too. These are just examples. But you know, the brain cannot stand cognitive dissonance, meaning it cannot stand to be in conflict with itself. So it will change to align with whichever force is stronger, whichever side of the conflict is stronger, and whatever you are programming it to believe you favour. By continuing to use the substance or activity, by continuing to put it ahead of other things, you are telling your brain to adapt in favour of the malfunctioned reward centre, to adapt towards you staying addicted. All the while, you're getting less and less result from the thing that gives you the result you crave. But this actually starts right away, this decline. That's why people talk about chasing the first high, because it declines immediately, but it becomes especially noticeable down the road. So each hit produces less dopamine than the last hit. Meanwhile, your reward center has been producing less and less dopamine for anything but that hit. At first, that use, that engagement, that addictive thing comes before giving attention to a loved one or a really productive day at work. But as it gets worse, at its worst, you end up with no motivation to shower. And there isn't even any pleasure in your own baby's giggle. By which time, there isn't even any pleasure in the drug or activity either. And then we're just using to feel normal. Somewhere along this journey, any pleasure from the substance or activity becomes an illusion. But when you truly see the truth, when you go through the True Freedom Recovery Model and see it for what it really is, the reward center starts to heal. And so does the rest of your brain. Yes, it takes time. How long, we'll look at another time. But it takes time, but it does heal. And then other pleasures start to return. And soon, genuine pleasures feel better than the illusion of pleasure ever felt. And then you don't want to stay tricked anymore. If you're wondering why not just stay tricked if the trick still feels good, you're still tricked. The only way out of that is exposure, saturating yourself with exposure to the truth, to see how illogical it is, to realize what's going on, that you've been tricked and robbed, but that you can walk away from the deception and restore what's been taken. Like, to know that that's possible. And you will see it if you want to, if you get it, you'll see the results in time. If this question resonates with you, please go through the True Freedom Recovery Model properly. Thinking seriously about the questions, like doing the teach it backs, engaging with it, like, and keep watching these videos, you know, saturate yourself in truth. So there's no room left anymore for the lie. Like, saturate, I'm going to repeat that, saturate yourself in the truth so that there's no room left anymore for the lie. And like I say, the brilliant thing is that the more you understand the truth and the more you stop feeding the malfunction and like telling your brain that that's what you want and how you want to live, the more you pull away from that, the more those measures of pleasure in the other areas of your life will start to lift again. The more you'll start to notice that you laugh at funny things now, the more you'll start to notice that those simple pleasures in life feel pleasurable again. Like, you know, you come to these moments where, whether it's something really, really big that you felt guilty for having no pleasure for before, you know, to do with relationships usually, or whether it's just like admiring a tree. Like, it's just mad how these other pleasures start to come back, like things like achieving, things like connecting. Like, the cap goes down on all of those things when we are in the trick. And then so that we feel like that substance or activity is what gives us pleasure, just because it's giving us more pleasure than all the other stuff. But it's not even giving us pleasure, and the only reason the other stuff isn't is because of that. So if you think to yourself, but the trick feels so good, why don't I just stay tricked? It's because you're still tricked. And saturate yourself in truth. I remember consciously thinking what Shannon has written in. I remember thinking that repeatedly, thinking, okay, I get it. Like, you know, because for me, it was a long journey of trial and error and figuring these things out. And, you know, that's why I've written True Freedom, to bring together the conclusions so that other people can get there quicker. And without as many, you know, mind you, I learned from the errors. But I remember thinking that as I was starting to learn the truth, but I didn't really know the truth yet. And like, I hadn't changed yet. But as soon as I did, as soon as I really knew the truth, like knew it, like that it became how I think, as soon as that happened and my brain started healing, there was no question anymore. Like, I knew I'd been tricked, and I knew it was an illusion, and I knew that why would I want to stay in that much pleasure just because it's more than that much, when without that I can have that much back in the other areas of my life again. Thank you, Shannon, for your question, and I hope you all have a good day. Bye.